Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Stock Market Today for Monday, April 28th. It's Alissa Coram here. And we saw stocks pausing today to kick off the week after some powerful gains last week. So we'll take it. We'll take the pause. And joining me now to discuss the action is my colleague, Justin Nielsen. Justin, what do you have for us today?
Yeah, it was kind of like, is it going to pause? Because for a while there, it seemed like it was going to go back up. But yeah, we did get kind of some flat action today, which I think is what the doctor ordered. But we're also going to talk about some stocks, including SAP, which I do have a position in. It was our stock of the day today on IBD. We'll also talk about BSX, and then also a lot of foreign banks have been on our radar, and so we'll talk about BAP.
Okay, sounds like a plan. We will get to those stocks, but first, let's take a closer look at those major indexes and the action that we saw here today. So the Nasdaq finished the day down just 0.1%, erasing losses from earlier on in the day, staging quite a comeback in the latter half of the session, battling back there to just a fractional decline. Meanwhile, the S&P 500 up about 0.1% on the day, reversing higher here. The Dow up 0.3%, and the Russell 2000 up about 0.4%, headed into the final stretch. So if you put this into context, Justin, of what we saw last week, a very powerful week, 4 straight days of pretty significant gains here. The fact that we were able to just hold in there and come off lows on the day, I think that's pretty compelling.
Yeah, I call that a win because basically, let's take a look at the weekly chart. I mean, we were up just a few weeks ago, up an astounding 7% after we made that bottom, and then really rallied up high. Again, remember that was a lot to do with the April 9th pause in tariffs, where we were up 12% on the Nasdaq in a single day, and then we took a pause. But I like how with the little move down that we had back down to 16,000, we really did stay in the upper part of the range of that week. And then last week, we built on it, a 6% gain, over a 6% gain on the NASDAQ. Now the issue is we're up at that 10-week moving average line. That's the
Right.
red line on your chart. And okay, now we have to see what we do here. If we go to the daily chart, as you and Mike talked about on Friday, one of the big things here is that we got the low above the 21-day moving average line. So that's crossing off one more checkbox that we've been asking the market to do for us, and it did that. We also kind of cleared some of this area, the high of April 9th. We cleared that. We've cleared that low of March 11th. So there's a number of check boxes that we are just going through one by one. Now the next one is going to be that 50-day moving
Yeah.
average line, the 10-week moving average line. But it almost, given how big the gains were back to back to back, it's almost a little good that we're stopping right here, taking a little bit of a breather, because if you go up too far too fast, you kind of come down a little bit harder and a little bit faster. So a little pause here, I think, is just what the doctor ordered. And again, we'll just see, can we hold with the low above the 21-day moving average line? Do we maybe, pull back to like the 17,000 level roughly? And then that could
Mhm.
potentially give us a little bit of a platform to launch from for the next move higher.
All well said, Justin. So, in terms of checking things off the boxes, one of the next things that we're looking for, according to our senior market strategist, Mike Webster, is 3 days where your low is above the 21-day and you close up on the day. That is an interesting signal that we like looking at. But you are so right, Justin, that 50-day and the 10-week line looms large,
Yeah.
very
And
large
look,
indeed.
the 3 days is not a big, it's not a big hurdle. It is, in that if you have a weak market,
Yeah.
you tend to dance up there and then come right back down. But in a
Mhm.
strong market, that's potentially tomorrow, because we had our first day on Friday. Today, even though it was down slightly, it still counts. And so,
Mhm.
if we can just stay above there tomorrow and close up. But look, even if we have a few days where we go sideways, that's not a bad thing. I do want to
Right.
address one issue. This is something
Sure.
that we talked a little bit about. The volume. It looks like it was a huge volume. And look, if you pull up AGMH, not many people have heard of this stock. Probably, it's 13 cents, trading up 200% for the day in price, because it was up 9 cents. And look, this was 2 billion, almost, yeah, 1.7 billion shares. You add in LGMK, another very low price stock,
Yeah, a
1
literal
cent.
penny stock.
Yeah, penny stock, literally. So between these two stocks, that's that's over a
A
quarter
lot
of
of
your volume on
volume.
the Nasdaq right there. Yeah, I would take that higher volume today with a very very large grain of salt.
Well said there. Let's also take a look at the S&P 500 and levels you're watching, Justin.
Yeah, so kind of the same thing. We did cross that April 9th high. We did cross that March 11th low. And the 5,500 just so happened to coincide with that. So a nice round number there. And look, we're running into the same situation here. We got a low above the 21-day moving average line on Friday. It closed up today, staying with that low above the 21-day moving average line. So if we get another one tomorrow, that's good news. It's kind of showing that we're in the right direction, as opposed to a lot of these cases where when you're below the 200-day moving average line, you have that vulnerability, and you could see again sometimes the dance above there and coming right back, which is still possible. I think that's important, that
Mhm,
no one
mhm.
gets so complacent by the recent gains to think that we couldn't take another leg down. It's too early to declare victory yet. We are
Right.
still below the 200-day. We are still below the 50-day moving average line. And we're looking at a declining 50-day moving average line. So that's something that we really kind of need some time to get that back in the right direction.
Right. And this is all from studying past market cycles, market history, looking at index level behavior to give us clues as to what we might expect in this scenario. But as always, and as you were alluding to, we're going to remain flexible to any scenario. Whether we get positive headlines, negative headlines, it's also a big earnings week this week,
Yeah.
so that's something to keep in mind as well. That could influence the tape this
Yeah.
week.
You read my mind. That was going to be my next point, because you've got Meta, you've got Microsoft, and with these such huge weights in the Nasdaq Composite and the S&P 500, and not only the stocks themselves, but what they influence. A lot of times it's like, oh, Meta is doing this. Who else does that influence? Who else, who does that trickle down to if they have a good earnings report or a bad earnings report? So yeah, there's a lot that's going to be coming out over the next couple weeks in terms of earnings, guidance, or lack of guidance that we might be seeing, and that might, toss things a little bit around.
Yes. Okay, quick thoughts on blue chips and small caps, and then we'll move
Well,
on.
look, it's hard to talk about the Dow Jones Industrial without talking about Boeing today. That was something that we talked about on the IBD Live show this morning. Look, we're seeing a lot of double bottoms, a lot of double bottoms in this market, and a lot of them are on the verge of breaking out. If they haven't broken out already, a lot of these are in better positions than the indexes, because they're above both the 50-day moving average line and 200-day moving average line. So that definitely helped the Dow Jones Industrial Average today. And look, the this is still only 30 stocks on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, but it's worth noting that a lot of times it is pretty good at capturing the essence of the big cap market, and it still has work to do.
Yes, and the Russell 2000, speaking of work to do,
Yeah,
we've got a lot of work to do here as well,
yeah. The
but,
thing that bothers me
keeping
the
an update.
most Yeah, the thing that bothers me the most with the Russell is just how long that relative strength line has been in a downtrend, and it just can't seem to to turn that around in a meaningful way for any length of time. 2000 has been a level that it seems like we crossed that level in 2023, at the end of 2023, and we're going to stay above it. And here we are back below it, and having to kind of restart all of that effort that it got all the way up almost to 2500. But it kind of, back to the drawing board on this one.
Yes, and we do know that small cap stocks are more interest rate sensitive at times, but let's take a look at the 10-year yield. So back to early in April, the bond market was kind of going bonkers,
Yeah.
getting yippy, one might say, but it looks like it's calming down, Justin. So that's a positive development.
Yes, but I mean, these are still some big moves, than you typically see for the bond market, the yields. So
Mhm.
I think there is still some uncertainty there. And look, a lot of times we talk about the correlations. Yields coming down does tend to be good for stocks, but on a day by day basis, that doesn't necessarily hold,
Right.
as we've seen recently. Look, last week we saw a move down in the yields, and the markets went up, but today yields down considerably, and we were seeing the Nasdaq down 1.5% at one point. So it doesn't necessarily correlate on a day by day basis, but it's worth kind of keeping an eye on, just to kind of get context. But you really can't make day to day decisions based on it.
Yep. Okay, next on the list, let's take a look at IBIT. This represents Bitcoin. I do own a position here, Justin. So if you want to look at instruments that had a big week last week and holding pretty steadily this week, this seems to fit the bill here.
Yeah, so I mean, if you take a look at IBIT, and I do have a position in this as well. I think we bought it around the same time as it was crossing above that 50-day moving average line. It's holding up well, and this kind of has a dual purpose almost. For a while there, this was your risk on
Yep.
type of play. But then it started becoming like, well, is this kind of more where you go to safety and currency when you've got a weak dollar, and almost like the new gold. And look, we
Hmm.
saw a big move in gold, recently, as a lot of this stuff was going on. Now that has come in a bit. Scott St. Clair mentioned on the show where he thought this was a little bit climactic, but of course today you had a nice strong up day in gold, as indexes were taking their pause. So I think you can see a little bit more of this inverse relationship, play out. But I think, really held strong, held those gains. So, it remains to be seen if this kind of becomes a little bit more of the, taking over for gold with a little bit more of that risk on.
Yeah. So an early entry early last week. Now we want to see, can it retain the bulk of that move, tighten up here, maybe present an add on or follow on entry. So we'll be looking for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's take a look at SAP. You mentioned this was our stock of the day. We got a breakout from a double bottom base, another double bottom here, Justin. Lots of double bottoms, as you mentioned, and a blue dot. So we like seeing that as well, underscoring that outperformance.
Yeah. So I do, again, own a position in this. We have to disclose that each time we talk about it. And we also, as you said, the relative strength line is really remarkably different. If you just take a look at the weekly chart on SAP, for a long time, SAP was kind of, well, actually, let's go to the monthly if we want to go even further back. SAP was just not really that great of a performer, after having such a well-known kind of brand, but they were a little bit slow getting into the subscription based model as opposed to the licensing. But Oracle, SAP, a lot of those companies have kind of adapted that. And I, again, want to recommend Reinhard Krause's IBD stock of the day article, because does talk about that cloud computing backlog, one of the metrics that they use, their own little metric. So that's something that you can find on the homepage, or if you're in Market Surge, you can pull it up from the news. But the relative strength is really markedly different now. So if, again, we take a look at the weekly chart, if we just kind of look at that earnings line. I mean, this was something that was really an ugly earnings line. So this
Mhm.
is a
The
little bit more
turnaround.
of a turnaround
Hmm.
situation. You see a lot of red in the earnings, and now that's kind of turned to blue. And lately, we've had some nice increases in that, 12% to 17% to 78% in the last quarter. So now we've got a context. Let's take a look at that daily chart, and we see that double bottom play out. We saw some real strong action after the last earnings report. And this was one of the first ones to report. It's in the computer software enterprise, very growthy, something that wasn't as favorable as the market was coming in. But this was kind of one of the first ones to really show its strength. It also has kind of a little bit of the international, because this is a German company. We were talking about how international stocks might be something that, uh, I mean, they've been in the doldrums for a long time, but this might be their time to shine. So you got the move above the 50-day moving average line. last week, and now you got a nice follow up above the traditional double bottom. So, this is an entry here. You could have done an early entry on that earnings report. I don't think I would have stepped in front of it, in front of the earnings report.
Right.
But after that earnings report was out of the way, even though it closed at the lows of the day, if you considered how far it came from the previous day's close, that was really a pretty decent looking move. And it's only built
Mhm.
on it from there. So, very
Yeah.
strong looking. And we'll see if this cloud computing and subscription based model really gives this some further legs.
Yes. And speaking of the bar, the weekly bar, quite strong. It gives you a good representation of how far it moved for the week and closed essentially at the top of the range by Friday.
Yeah, and nice support right there at the 40-week moving average line, as well as that 200-day moving average line.
Yes. And let's now go to BSX, another double bottom. It hasn't quite broken out here yet, Justin, in the medical products group, but like SAP, earnings are out of the way. There was a favorable reaction, there was acceleration in bottom line growth here. And like I said, it hasn't broken out yet of that traditional entry, but it did clear a trend line today.
Yeah, and it's getting above that Wednesday high. So again, if you were looking at that earnings report and saying, "Okay, well, gosh, that was a really big move. Does it need to take a little bit of a pause?" It has. It has for a few days. I would have liked to see it clear it more decisively today, but it's right there. And so this is something that could be actionable, either today or any day now. So I think this is well worth watching. That medical products area is something that I'm keeping an eye on. I think that there's a lot of strength there. You look at the weekly chart here, and this is a very different situation. This has got a lot of strength. You see that earnings move, that earnings line, and it's just a nice steady uptrend that we've had. If you roll up a little bit, you can see that this has got an 11 earning stability with a decent 18% EPS growth. 11, the lower the number, the better. It's 1 to 99. So this has got a pretty stable earnings growth. And again, medical products is something that is, fairly resilient. So I
Yeah.
like the relative strength line on this. A lot of things are looking positive. I don't own a position, but this is definitely on my watch list. And yeah, it doesn't have a big ATR either. This is not a stock that moves as whippy as a lot of the growth names that we've seen. So that's
Mhm.
another plus for this one.
Yeah, average true range, measure of
Yeah,
that
thank you.
volatility or the moves there. We like taking a look at that. Yeah, so a little steadier here, and it's at that intersection of defensive and growth. So something to keep in mind in the current climate. Let's round things out with a look at BAP, not one that we look at a whole lot, Justin. Credicorp in the
Mhm.
foreign banks group. We've been talking, like you mentioned earlier, SAP out of Germany. We've been looking at international stocks. So this one's made quite a move over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and a few of the stocks that we've been talking about in this group, number 6 out of 197 for the bank's foreign group. IBN is one that we were looking at earlier. This is one that has
Mhm.
already broken out of a cup with handle. This is in,
India.
GGAL in Argentina.
Hmm.
IBN is in India. So you've got a number of these. I mean, Deutsche Bank. And so for BAP, this is in Peru. So it's just a lot of these foreign banks have been looking interesting. This is a little bit of a mix, so we got away from our double bottom. This is a little bit different, but it does have that strong relative strength. This was fairly tight. It really kind of held up very nicely. Didn't really lose a lot of ground. It just came down below that 40-week moving average line, but not for very long. And if you scroll down to the earnings, you can see that this had a few hit and miss quarters, here and there, but really strong on its last earnings growth. And the revenue is a little lackluster, but this is in the right group. So again, if you're kind of in a belief of Latin America strength, we do have Argentina. You can take a look at ARGT as an example of that, showing strength. GGAL that you already brought up. And then again, this is in Peru, BAP, but it also serves Bolivia and Colombia. So there's a lot of strength if you just kind of look at the international funds in Latin America and even Mexico. EWW has been looking very strong lately. So that might bode well for this region.
Okay, so in terms of BAP's chart here, that 200 level is the high from the consolidation. If you didn't get an early entry here, Justin, is it okay to use that breakout level, or what would you want to see from this stock?
Yeah, this definitely did provide that early entry, a lot of strength as it kind of cleared that little area of resistance, as well as the 50-day moving average line. 200, completely legitimate. That's a nice round number. You could use that if you wanted to sneak in. I think you could have done that with that 197.65 as a little bit of an earlier entry. But we're talking about a few percentage points. Not at the end of the day, if you're really looking for a larger gain, a percentage,
Yeah.
isn't going to matter too much. But look, in a unforgiving market, we do try and be a little bit more precise with our buy points, and sometimes get in a little bit early, because then you can add to it. You can kind of go in a little tentative with your first, and then maybe add to it as it proves itself and gives you confirmation. So I don't hate the early entries on these stocks right now, with
Mhm.
opportunities to add later.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, Justin, thanks a bunch. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for tuning in. That is it from us for today, but we will be back with more tomorrow morning on IBD Live, investors.com/IBD Live for all the details on that. We will see you there. And then we'll also see you right back here tomorrow after the close.